One of the craziest things to me that I just can't wrap my head around is how huge League of Legends has become. I mean, in only a decade, we've gone from nerdy kids playing a video game in their mother's basement to those same nerdy kids now being multi-millionaires, owners of gigantic esports teams. It's crazy when you think how much some people's lives have been changed by the explosion of esports. But of course, not everybody got to win this video game lottery. Players nowadays may get huge contracts with tons of cash packed into them, but there was nothing like that for the first generation of League's pros. For those pioneers, they just played the game because they thought it was fun, and sure, some veterans from those early eras were able to have long and successful careers afterwards, but most weren't so lucky. Most of them only even had a brief period of time where they got to play the game before having to return to their normal lives. The vast majority of these guys, they're not millionaires today. They aren't team owners, they aren't superstars. All they have from their time with League is what they were able to accomplish on Summoner's Rift, and even then, most of these guys probably didn't accomplish as much as I'm sure they would have liked to. But every once in a while, you run into a player who did do something pretty neat. And today I want to talk to you guys about a guy who was able to carry his team to winning the most prestigious event that even exists in all of League of Legends. And not only did he win it, but he did so with one of the weirdest strategies that has ever existed in all of League. One of the only pieces of technical skill that existed in Season 1 of League was the Alistar Headbutt Pulverize combo. In case you're unfamiliar with it, Alistar is a support champion that has two crowd control abilities. His first is his W Headbutt, which jumps him to an opponent and then knocks that opponent backwards. The second, Pulverize, knocks up and stuns characters in an area of effect around him. If you're quick enough, using these abilities back to back can pull off a little combo where you jump to your opponent with the headbutt while then knocking them up in the air with Pulverize before they get hit away. Pro players loved playing around with this strategy in early seasons of League, since back then it was basically the only way that they could show off their skill. It wasn't just his fun combo that made him so well liked though. The rest of Alistar's kit also synergized alongside it super effectively. He had an AoE heal on his E, which was unusual for a crowd control engager to have that kind of supportive buff. Plus, he also had his ultimate, which was insanely useful as it made him instantly tanky, giving % damage reduction to all incoming attacks. All of these abilities put together gave Alistar a kit that was pretty much overloaded compared to the other support champions of Season 1. However, as good as he was as a support, there was one tiny little detail that almost nobody had noticed. Alistar's passive, Q, W, and E abilities all scaled off of ability power and had really good AP ratios, suggesting that maybe Alistar could be built as a full damage AP mage mid lane. Headbutt and Pulverize in particular were kind of insane in Season 1, as Headbutt had a 70% AP ratio and Pulverize had 100% AP scaling. A 100% ratio means you're dealing 1 extra damage for every bonus ability power you have. For comparison's sake, if you look at other mages today, they'll have a 30%, 40%, or maybe upwards of 60% scaling on their burst spells. For any character to have a 100% ratio on anything was incredibly unusual. It was only a matter of time before someone decided to try and play Alistar as a full AP champion, and the player who eventually took up that crusade was a Polish mid laner who went by the name Xuxe. This is a name plenty of early LoL fans will remember as one of the perennial high-rated ELO players of Europe throughout Season 1. A former Dota and Han player, Xuxe first got involved in competitive League of Legends almost accidentally. He was climbing up the solo queue ladder and was around 1500 rating for a while, which would probably be around mid-gold tier today. When he was grinding out ranked matches though, he was experiencing something that many solo queue stars experience. frustration from his teammates being awful. On one particular day of grinding out games, he found himself getting a little bit lucky in that he was actually paired up with a teammate who played almost as well as himself. Naturally, after the match was over, the two players added each other and started duo queuing together, and it wasn't long before they found themselves climbing up the European ladder, getting some of the highest ratings on the server and becoming good friends in the process. Later on, that duo queue partner, Expeke, wanted to get into competitive League, and when he was forming a team to enter tournaments, he invited Xuxe to join him. The two players would then go on to be known as the solo lane superstars of this new competitive team. They'd play for a number of different organizations at first, but you most likely know them as Fnatic's first lineup, who signed the team in the spring of 2011. Xuxe described his function on the roster as a player who mained exotic champions, either AD or AP carries, and this is a pretty apt description of him. Throughout Season 1, he was well known for taking really unusual characters down mid lane. The first big example of this was Gragas, who at the time was mostly played as a top lane tank. He was a tough-to-kill character who had big displacements and crowd control abilities that most people thought were perfect for a tanky character, but who Xuxe got the idea to try and start playing mid lane. He realized that Gragas had some interesting burst abilities that could be comboed together, and if you built full AP damage on him, you could nearly one-shot squishy carries on the enemy team. This of course turned into a super mainstream strategy that became so popular, Gragas eventually had to get a mini rework. Xuxe had a really creative mind for this kind of stuff, so it only made sense that he was the one who first discovered those crazy AP ratios on Alistar. As soon as he noticed them, he began working on a strategy to try and play Ali as a full AP damage dealing mid laner, and it wasn't long into his journey that he found out this strategy worked really well. The odd thing about it was, if Alistar was building full AP, he could deal comparable burst damage to other mid lane mages out there with his combo alone, but even if he went full damage, he would still have all the other things in his kit that already made him such a great support. His heal also scaled off AP, meaning it actually worked better when Ali was built as an AP mage, giving himself and his allies bigger heals. On top of that, his ultimate, which gave him his tankiness, did so from a flat % of damage reduction, meaning no matter what items you built on Alistar, he would always get crazy tanky whenever you pop your R. All of this kind of meant that if you went for a full mage Alistar mid lane build, you could not only get tons of damage from Headbutt Pulv, but you would also still be just as great of a support for your team as any regular Alistar support bot lane would be. Now, I don't want to make it sound like AP Alistar was an easy thing to play, because it wasn't. Alistar still had a few weaknesses in his kit that prevented some of the other theory crafters of the day from making a full AP build work. For instance, he had really long cooldowns, sometimes more than 15 seconds on basic abilities, which meant issues like you could only do one Headbutt Pulverize combo in a laning phase or in teamfights before suddenly having to disengage and wait for your cooldowns to come up. On top of that, these are the only two burst abilities you have at all. I mean, you don't really get much damage from anywhere else, meaning that you need to get quite a bit of ability power in your items before you're able to kill any opponents. In addition to all of this, Alistar is also a melee champion, whereas most of the mid lane mages of Season 1 were ranged. This meant that he'd have to stand much further forward in laning phase to farm gold for his itemization, which is fairly unsafe considering he has no natural escape to get away from ganks or if his opponent engages onto him. But Xuxe was able to play in such a way that almost none of these weaknesses mattered. Rather than going for solo kills in laning phase like every other pro in Season 1, Xuxe was content sitting back and farming up until late game. He would build items like Cage's Lucky Pick, which was this old odd item that gave you bonus AP along with passive gold, generating 5 gold for you every 10 seconds. Doing stuff like this would still give Xuxe enough income to keep up with every other character in game, and eventually allowed him to scale into his late game fantasy. By the end of a match, when he got to full build, he would suddenly be able to one-shot people with his combo, kill killing them instantly. He might still have a bit of a modest cooldown once that's done, but that's all a burst mage is supposed to do, take at least one enemy out. The difference with AP Alistar though is once he's done that job, he could then transition into another one, being a healer or a tank for his team until his cooldowns come back up, allowing him to then go in and try and get more kills. Xuxe was a really smart player who was able to craft unique strategies like this and made them work competitively, but you may not know his name if you only started playing League somewhat recently. That's because he was sadly one of those players I mentioned in the intro of this video who faded away from League's competitive scene before it really blew up to its modern gigantic heights. At the end of the day, he was maybe just born a little too early. By the time the LCS had begun in Europe, he was already 24 years old, which for an esports player is typically past their prime. For reference, the legendary mid laner Faker, who has won 3 different world championships and nearly countless Korean titles, only turned 24 this month. It was just kind of unfortunate that Xuxe didn't get a chance to participate in League's modern scene until he was over his peak. He managed to qualify for the EU LCS once with a team called Dragonborns in 2013, but at the end of the day, he wasn't able to keep up with the highly technical and impressive mid laners of Europe, and the team would be relegated after a split of play. But there was one big tournament where Xuxe got to compete while still in his heyday, and that was none other than the Season 1 World Championship. As we detailed in the G2 Ocelot documentary, to qualify for Season 1 Worlds, teams had to play through a double elimination bracket where the top 3 rosters made it to the event. They were seeded into the qualifier based on previous tournament performances, and Fnatic's roster ended up as Europe's number 3 seed. There were still 2 strong teams ahead of them who were clearly better at the time: SK Gaming, who were the consensus best overall team in Europe, and a French team named Against All Authority, led by some of the highest rated solo queue players on EU's server. Fnatic would advance in the tournament until they faced off against AAA, who managed to beat them, knocking their squad down to the losers bracket. Trying to keep a stiff upper lip, they soldiered on, avoiding elimination until they came up against SK Gaming. SK had been sent down themselves in a surprise upset, so when Fnatic suddenly had to face the best team in Europe, most viewers expected this to be the point where they met their fate, but to everyone's surprise, Xuxe and Xpeke managed to carry this team to a victory, advancing in bracket another round. Fnatic immediately lost the next series they played, but at this point they had already made it far enough that they qualified for the Season 1 World Championship, so the team started packing their bags to head off to the main event. This first iteration of Worlds was hosted at DreamHack Summer in Jönköping, Sweden, and sadly for Fnatic, they would run into a major problem before any matches were even played. Xpeke was absent. His flight from Spain was delayed and prevented him from attending the entirety of the group stage, meaning Fnatic would have to sub in a player named We Will Failer, who was not as experienced with the team. Now, group stage of this event consisted of 2 groups of 4 where the top 3 teams from each group would advance to the knockout round. Naturally, you wouldn't think it would be hard for Fnatic to make it out since they just had to get top 3 out of 4, but unfortunately for them, they had a disastrous group stage. They would lose to both Against All Authority and the North American team in their group, Epic Gamer, in 2 separate best-of-1s. They only managed to escape groups by getting a single win against the Southeast Asia representatives Pacific Esports, who they beat off the back of Xuxe's Alistar.
Still looking to get out of that one. Dame very hurt in that situation. And Alistar again pushing into the face of Wormy. Will Xuxe be able to get a second kill onto Karthus? And he does. The ultimate already used. It looks like he's just going to try to lay waste as Alistar runs away. Corki almost getting...
Corki actually in the AoE there from Karthus also goes down. Xuxe has enough help and cleans up the team, and that's an ace against by Soul Stealer. And yeah, he's doing really well for himself.
Oh wow, the damage output coming from Alistar. Flash away from Karthus. Come the pool and ultimate. And Divine going down as Garen. And it looks like
Xuxe would have likely done nothing but play Alistar this whole event if he was allowed to, but Ali would have a 90% picker ban ratio due to his dominance in support. He was so good bot lane that even Fnatic would have to ban him if they didn't have first pick. This high priority for the champion obviously made it difficult for Xuxe to play him, but he would still manage to snag the character in 4 separate games, which is all that he really needed. The first was this match against Team Pacific, where the Southeast Asian squad simply simply wasn't up to date with Xuche's strategy and didn't ban Alistar in the champion select phase. He'd punished them by running up a score of 11 kills, 0 deaths, and 6 assists, and thankfully this was all that was needed to get Fnatic out of groups. In the knockout bracket, Fnatic's first test would be the North American team Counter Logic Gaming, who, as I've mentioned in previous videos, CLG was one of the best teams in Season 1. It was going to be incredibly hard for Fnatic to get past them, as CLG had finished second in their group, meaning they were given a game advantage in this best of 3, and a win in either of their next 2 matches would advance them in bracket while sending Fnatic home. But thankfully for the Europeans, Xpeke had finally made it to Sweden and was ready to play. He would put on some insanely impressive performances in their matches against CLG, but even he was still outclassed by Xuche, who once again carried the hell out of Fnatic, racking up an infinite KDA. He wouldn't die in either match of this 2-0 sweep. The victory sent Fnatic to the winners bracket semi-finals, where they'd have to face off against Epic Gamer once again. Now, Epic had already beaten Fnatic handedly in the group stage, and it looked like they were the better team. Coincidentally, that group stage match was the second time Xuche was able to play Alistar, and he did considerably worse compared to his first match, but this wasn't entirely his fault. Xuche had been forced to play Alistar top lane since Xpeke's substitution didn't have as strong of a champion pool and needed to go mid for this match. This meant that Xuche would not only have to play top lane, but he would also have to play top against a player named Westrice. Now, if you know anything about that name, you probably know that Westrice is most known for being the greatest Akali player in the early history of League, so naturally when Xuche had to lane against Westrice's Akali, it was understandable when Epic picked up the win.
And she's going for him.
Wow, that is Westrice on his game right there. There comes the clairvoyance. Oh, able to dodge past again.
Here in bracket, though, things were much different. This was a best of 3 where Fnatic were playing at full strength, and Xuche could go back to his native mid lane. On top of this, they also had another thing going for them. Because Epic didn't have trouble with Xuche's Alistar in group stage, they didn't think that he was that threatening and didn't ban him in any of their matches. Xuche would get Alistar in the next 2 games and had a chance to send Fnatic to the winners bracket finals.
We need to be careful now. The rest of Epic are moving in from behind, but it looks like they are going to go in for this one. Xuche falling a little bit low, but the pressure is going in. Dandin is also very low, and that was a great flash from Xuche. Dandin maybe will get away from this one. He does have an ignite on him, does go down. Westrice is now down. Salsei is super low. Actually, I'm not sure how he even survived at the end of that one. There goes Dandin. Obviously, Westrice down a lot earlier on as well. Jarvan is dead, and this surely Fnatic are just going to push straight through and get the victory.
First goal of the game for their team, gets a slow on, but no double up will knock up, then flash. He will make it away safely.
Xuche's coming in though behind, and he will actually get that kill onto double if they did not expect that one, and that is the first kill of game. And well, Xuche and Melisande are still there. Dandin is going to go down. Is he? No, he's not. Xuche is running the other way around, and Xuche's running into a horrible death. Is he? No, he's not! He's gonna go in onto Sals.
Soraka, but still getting pushed around. Asher with a ton of damage. Jarvan as well. They might take a ton of deaths here. Bubble Lift in the front. Can he pick up PK? Will not actually, but Westrice will. And Alistar getting pushed around, but a ton of kills coming in. Looks like Epic might lose almost everyone here. They've only picked up 1. Nando will flash across the wall. They've lost 2 for that 1. Jarvan chasing him down though. He might pick up that kill, and Xuche will do the work. In that Lich Bane, Alistar does a ton of damage to turrets.
Whoa, that's a super aggressive flash over the top there from Xuche. Absolutely amazing. And now the focus going in out to Dyrus. Maybe he gets all 3. Lamia is going to force his way over as well. Westrice goes down. That was amazing from Fnatic. This turret
game, the 1 turret is down. Dandin up in the front. The 2 turrets are down. They are now on to the Nexus. Will it be an EU winner bracket final? Looks like it will. Fnatic will win this series 2-0. Will reach the winner bracket final against All Authority. TSM.
Fnatic would sweep Epic 2 games to nothing, and shortly after that, they would beat Against All Authority twice to win the whole event. Xuxie's match log with Alistar shows just why nobody else let him through bans for the remainder of the tournament. I mean, he only got to play him in 3 separate games mid lane, but averaged more kills than any other mid lane champion the entirety of the competition. It was such a huge consensus that Xuxie, and partly Alistar, had carried Fnatic to this championship win that he was awarded the MVP of Season 1 Worlds. To date, this is possibly the most famous success story of an off-meta strategy at any League of Legends tournament. AP Alistar would eventually be nerfed after Season 1 concluded and faded away from the competitive scene shortly thereafter. Even though the nerfs weren't super crazy, Alistar still actually has really good AP ratios even today, League just moved into a different direction that made old strategies like this much less viable. More characters were introduced to the game who have really impressive skill sets, stuff like combos that are way more complicated and interesting than something as simple as a headbutt pulverize. Nowadays, the game isn't really about using odd or creative builds anymore. Rather, players are more focused on mastering the technical combos already built into champion kits, which allows them to pull off flashy outplays. Coincidentally, League moving on from off-meta strategies also meant that the theory crafters and off-meta builders had to move on from League as well. I mean, Xuxie had many other contemporaries like him, players who would spend hours diving into the stats and analytics of champions, trying to figure out how to make weird, fun strategies work. But when weird strategies stopped working, those specialists really had no other choice but to fade away from League's competitive scene. But you know what? At the end of the day, that's probably okay. League of Legends is better off for having the high skill cap champions we now have, who let mechanical gods pull off crazy outplays. These moments of spectacle are honestly way more fun to see than just an odd character built in a wonky way. But even then, it's still a little bit sad that creative builds like this are gone. And it's even sadder that the players who spearheaded them may never get the recognition that they truly deserve. They didn't get million-dollar contracts, they didn't become superstars, they aren't team owners. All that they have from their time with League is what they were able to accomplish on Summoner's Rift, which for most of these guys, they probably didn't accomplish as much as I'm sure they would have liked to. However, at least one of them did. I mean, he pulled off a tournament run that's as impressive as anyone else ever has had, and he won some of the highest honors available to a player in this game. His career might have been brief, but it sure as hell was impressive, and I hope he'll always be remembered for it.